Bursts of harsh light flash in and out. Through the fabric of his mask, Peter Parker struggles to maintain his vision. The bits and pieces of the outside world that Peter does manage to glimpse are chaotic and fleeting. A voice thick with desperation and panic tries to speak out to him as Peter fights to maintain consciousness. "Stay still," it says. "Relax, will ya?" The worried, upside-down face of J. Jonah Jameson appears in Peter's vision briefly before once more his world is turned to black. "If you're gonna be a baby," Jameson whines, "don't look down." Then, as Peter's eyesight finally begins to swim into focus, "He's looking down, isn't he?" Jameson says to himself. When Peter's senses return, he's flying over the city streets alongside his angry, obstinate editor-in-chief. No, not flying, being carried. "Quit squirming!" Jameson shouts. "You do this to people all the time!" When Spider-Man looks up, he sees his old boss piloting the infamous mechanical limbs of Dr. Octopus. The metal tentacles squeeze Peter tight as the two men climb over the city streets. Peter, having just awoken, can't help but scream out in fear as he's roughly carried across town. "You'll be safe here," Jameson cries as he tosses Spidey haphazardly through an open window. "Oof!" Peter lets out as he hits the floor. Rather than jumping to his feet with his usual bright zeal, however, Spider-Man doggedly lifts himself to his knees as Jameson climbs through the window himself. "Whatever Otto did to Oscorp's computers, they were going crazy," JJJ says to Spidey, clearly hopped up on adrenaline from their escape. "Norman," Spider-Man manages from the floor. "Otto has Norman. Did you see where he took him?" Peter looked at Jameson from behind his mask, desperate for answers. JJJ looked down at him silently, fear and trepidation beating behind his eyes. Spider-Man's eyes narrowed. "Does anyone know where Norman Osborn is?" he yelled in rage. Meanwhile, the man in question, Norman Osborn, was strapped down on an operating table. A strange, high-tech helmet was fastened around his head, beaming terrible visions into Osborn's mind's eye. But these images, though horrifying, were strangely familiar to Norman. Indeed, the man staring back at him was himself. "I figured out every single little thing about you, Octavius. I'm gonna take everything from you." The Green Goblin shrieked in Norman's head, his beady eyes cutting like knives as he stared back at Osborn. In the chair, Norman struggled and moaned as the nightmare spiked his pulse. Osborn watched as the Green Goblin systematically destroyed everywhere that ever meant anything to Otto Octavius. "Those metal arms, based on your old designs, so pathetically easy to hijack for a real genius." The Goblin cackled as Norman watched the superior Spider-Man struggle against his own metallic arms. Norman screamed, unable to take any more mental torture. "That's enough," echoed the stone-cold voice of Otto Octavius, who stared intently at his prisoner as Norman awoke from the nightmares. What are you doing to me?" Osborn cried. "Compelling images, aren't they, Norman?" Otto scowled. "Those are your memories," Norman realized as he watched his captor glare down at him. "Of your actions, yes," Otto said. "A reminder of what you took from me, of the debt I've come to collect." Otto's lips curled into a smile as he watched the fear grow in Norman's eyes. "If you wanted me to feel shame, your wish was fulfilled," Otto began raging. "But now I have outsmarted you. I hacked your costume. I blew up your life. It is you who are shamed." Suddenly, Otto began screaming at Norman. "Say it! Say it is you who are shamed!" Otto leveled at Osborn. It is I who am shamed," said the man rather awkwardly. Otto's rage subsided for the moment. "Now, we can really get to work," the mad scientist said, his crazed smile betraying the broken mind behind the genius. Back at the apartment, Spider-Man had begun pacing, unsure of what to do next. Otto has to have taken Norman to some kind of hideout, and those arms must have some idea where it is, he reasoned. Jameson crouched beside the arms that had carried him and Peter to safety. "Looks like they tuckered themselves out getting us here. I think they're taking a nap," he said. "Jonah," Spidey said, annoyance beginning to creep into his tone. "I know you've grown attached to those arms, but they're how Otto got access to Oscorp to begin with. Jonah's face flashed with anger as he pointed towards Spidey.
I know these things, and there's no way they knew anything about that,
Jameson yelled, but as he took his eyes away from the mechanical arms, something began to emerge from the spinal cavity of the contraption. Razor-sharp, needle-like pincers extended out from the spinal brace of the mechanism. They snapped and twitched like claws. Without warning, the arms hurled themselves at Spider-Man. "Ah!" Peter screamed. "What do you think you're doing?" His arms just barely caught the robot in time. "Get these things off me!" he yelled, hurling the arms across the room. Jameson held Spider-Man back as he braced for another attack, but it never came. "Wait a minute, I think that might be a spinal interface," Spider-Man recognized as he watched the robot intently. "It must be how he connects his nervous system to the arms." Jameson looked confused.
"It wants to connect with you? I guess that's kind of flattering, right?"
he offered meekly. Far off into the city, a high-pitched scream sounded into the New York City night. Police followed the noise to a back alley and found a woman strung up in webbing 10 feet off the ground. Dogs ran from the scene as they approached. "Will you get me down from here?" the woman yelled when the cops arrived. "What's your deal, lady? You got a gun?" they asked, wondering why Spider-Man would have apprehended this particular woman. "No, I don't have a gun," she exclaimed. "I'm a dog walker." From a nearby rooftop in the shadows, a burly figure stood watch over the scene.
"Hear this, puppy and prisoners of York City, Newtown?" it whispered into the night. "None of you are safe."
Then, leaping from the roof, a web zipped from the figure's wrist as it took off into the city.
"So says the web-wanging warrior, Rick Rapp," it called.
Back at Otto's lab, things were going from bad to worse for Norman Osborn. "You can fool them, but you'll never fool me," Otto monologued, barely paying attention to Norman anymore as he fiddled with the controls on his computer. "I know this idea that you're reformed is a ruse. Your master plan will soon be known to me. I will expose it, and then I will destroy it." Norman tried to be the voice of reason. "Otto, there is no master plan," he assured the madman. "You hear the whir of my machines," Otto taunted. "Are you sweating yet?" Norman desperately tried to get through to Octavius. "I'm quite comfortable," he assured his captor. "There is no master plan." "Ha!" Otto let out. "We'll see about that." When Otto's decryptors finally decode the files, all he finds are plans for new applications of electric plasma, a business idea of Osborn's. The realization that Norman might not actually have a master plan after all sends Otto into a rage once more. "What are you hiding?" he cries at Norman as his arms lash out and strike his captive across the jaw. "Tell me your plan so I may blow it up in front of you," Doc Ock screams. "Otto, I'm not lying. I'm sincerely trying to make up for the harm I've caused." Octavius's eyes narrow with suspicion as he repeats himself, hatred seething behind every word. "We'll see about that." "Are we doing this?" Jameson exclaims, anxiously waiting for Peter to make up his mind. "We're talking about connecting my nervous system to the appendages of my greatest enemy," Peter says, staring out the window, lost in thought. "Give me a second."
"No use being a baby about it,"
JJJ says with frustration. Peter looks back into the apartment. "Okay, I'm ready." Spidey approaches the arms with trepidation. "Come on, Peter. Sometimes you can't make an omelet without jamming some spikes into your spinal cord." Tentatively, Peter secures the brace around his middle and waits for the arms to connect themselves to his spinal tissue. "Do you feel anything?" Jameson asks. "I think so," Peter responds. "It kind of tickles. It's not so bad." "Wait, no, there it is. That's bad," Peter cries out suddenly as the arms begin to dig through the skin and muscle of his back, looking for the nerve endings along his spine. Peter thrashed and flailed as the arms began rewiring themselves into his muscular system. "That's bad," he cried as he fumbled around the room.
"Cut that out!"
Jameson yelled as Peter chaotically bounded from wall to wall. "You get an auto epidural and then you cut it out!" Spidey called back at him angrily. Finally, mercifully, it was over. Peter stood up, the mechanical arms no longer cutting into him. "Oh, wow, That's weird, he said to himself. Are you okay? A worried JJJ asked. Peter looked up at him, determination in his voice. I need tools, he said. Meanwhile, Norman was still the object of Dr. Octopus's rage, and he was taking a beating like no other. You're a fraud, Norman! Otto screamed as his mechanical arms beat Osborn within an inch of his life. Fight back! Show me the goblin inside you! Osborn's head slammed against a metal tray, and he could only manage a whisper as he tried to respond. The goblin is gone, Otto. I've changed. Why can't you accept that? Norman managed. Because I wasn't allowed to, Otto cried out. Never mind. I'm not here for introspection. I'm here for revenge. The doctor refocused. And if you have truly freed yourself of the goblin, then that is what I'll take from you. Otto grimaced as the next drastic final step in his revenge fantasy materialized in his mind. Bring it to me, Otto whispered, his voice wavering. Bring what? Norman asked. What are you doing, Otto? Octavius stood tall, confident in his coming victory. I hope you have convinced yourself you're good, Norman, he said. I hope that warm fantasy comforts you at night, because you're about to lose it to this. Otto reached for a glowing briefcase and held it open for Norman to stare at its horrible contents. Norman's face was flushed with confusion at first, but his expression quickly turned to that of abject terror when he realized what Doc Ock had in store for him. Jameson stared out the window as Peter worked tirelessly, making adjustments to his newfound robotic limbs. Here I am, he thought, playing with Otto's toys. But Spidey was working more on instinct than intelligence. Instincts he didn't know he had. But how am I working so fast? He wondered. Why is this so easy? Peter's hands worked away as his mind drifted. It's like the arms are telling me how to fix them. They're reminding me, he realized with a chill. Finally, Peter's voice rang out. Jonah! Jameson turned, and when he saw what Peter had been working on, he let out an awestruck, "Holy crow." Standing before him was Spider-Man, complete with 4 extra mechanical arms wrapped around his waist. The crimson painted limbs snaked and surrounded Peter like they had always been there, and Peter's mind controlled them with an expertise that seemed almost second nature. An octopus isn't the only thing with 8 legs, Spider-Man said, prepared to face down any foe that stood in his way. Norman pleaded with Otto as his restraints kept him strapped to the operating chair. Don't do this, Otto! You've outsmarted me. You've won! Otto took the small capsule out of the briefcase, handling it with the utmost care. I can feel it, he said. You took something from me I can never get back, and now it's my turn to do the same. Doc Ock held a sickly green syringe between his fingers, filled with the same poison that once introduced Norman Osborn to the one and only Green Goblin. Otto, don't do this! Norman yelled. Octavius smiled viciously. And waste it? He said as he approached. Are you kidding me? Do you know how hard this was to make? Please, no! Norman screamed as he watched the needle enter his vein and the green contents begin emptying into his bloodstream. Yes, Otto said, his tone cold and hateful. Do you feel it, Norman? The goblin serum coursing through your veins? Otto asked as Osborn knelt on the ground, struggling to keep his inner demon in check. You have no idea what you've done, Octavius! Norman shot back. I'm showing them all you haven't changed a bit. That under it all, you're still a villain, Otto told him. Norman began to giggle, a dark, intense laughter that echoed with something truly evil. Yes, let yourself go, Otto encouraged. Let the goblin out. Norman began cackling now. You should have listened to me, Otto! He screamed in pain. Then, suddenly, Osborn turned back towards Octavius, no hint of the goblin in his eyes. Because you're an idiot, he told Otto. That was enough goblin serum to turn an elephant! Otto cried, incredulous that Norman was maintaining his composure. Osborn stood, And I already have double that running through my veins. Otto's face darkened as he listened to Norman's words. My body has absorbed a massive amount over the years. I learned to manage its effects long ago. Impossible, Doc Ock whispered. Norman explains that it was never the serum that turned him into the goblin. It was his inner evil that made it manifest. An evil that has been cleansed. An evil a buffoon like you could never dream of resurrecting. Norman spat at Otto. Doc Ock whipped around. "Do not call me a buffoon!" he roared, lashing out at Osborn with all his mechanical limbs. "If your intelligence were equal to mine, you would not be at my mercy." Otto glared down at Osborn as he beat the defenseless man again and again. "Mercy that has come to an end!" Octavius screamed. Peter and Jameson stand atop the roof as Spider-Man prepares to make his way out into the city. "So you know where Otto's keeping Norman?" JJJ asks. "The arms know, so I do too," Peter replies. "You do look comfortable in those things. Maybe too comfortable," Jameson tells him. Spidey's head turns on him darkly. "You dare question me, you dolt?" he exclaims before catching his mouth, shocked at the words that just escaped his lips. "I should probably get going," Peter says. Jameson agrees. "Better wrap this up and get out of those things as soon as possible," he tells Spidey. "Agreed," Peter says as he leaps out into the night. "Because I'm afraid I could get used to this." Back at the lab, Octavius realizes he only has one last way of getting his revenge. "I had hoped to take everything from you, Norman," he says as Osborn groans from the floor, beaten and bloodied. "But you took that away from me by being the most boring, pathetic version of yourself I've ever seen." Otto wrapped Norman in his mechanical arms and began hefting him closer and closer to the electric coils in the center of the lab. "So now all I can do is take your life," Otto cried gleefully. "Otto, wait," Norman tried to speak. "I don't think I will," Doc Ock shot back. "Because you did the one thing I'd only admit to someone I was about to kill. You outsmarted me," he said as Osborn began inching closer and closer to a painful death. Moments before the end, however, the doors to Dr. Octopus's lab were ripped open by the newly reforged mechanical limbs of Spider-Man. "Otto!" Peter called out. "Put him down!" Instantly, Octavius began to scream in fear. "You presume to give orders to me! I will not release Osborn until—" But to Otto's surprise, his arms quite suddenly dropped Osborn to the floor, unharmed. "How are you confusing my Octoids?" Octavius bellowed. "Maybe they recognize the voice of true authority," Spidey shot back, a cool anger radiating behind his words. "You didn't," Otto said, but then realization dawned on him. "You did." "You spine-locked with my arms!" he cried into the lab, more furious than he'd ever been. "I did," Spidey said, as his own metal arms shot from behind his back to clash against Doc Ock's assault. "The die is cast." Spidey whizzed and whirled around the room, relying on his robotic limbs to protect him from Otto's Octoids. "Thanks to you, this is all muscle memory," Spidey mocked. "You cannot out-octopus me, dolt!" Otto yelled. "We shall see, dolt!" Spidey shot back as the 8 arms clashed together between the two men. Who are you calling dolt, you dolt? Both Spidey and Doc Ock cried in unison, a strange symmetry forming between the two men as they battled against each other. "Your mechanical arms were the only reason you were ever a threat, Otto. They gave you an advantage, and that advantage is gone," Spider-Man roared as his own metal limbs threw Octavius to the floor. "Ha! You think an octopus takes its prey by raw power? Fool!" Octopus erupted back at him as the high-voltage coils behind them began to spark and fizzle. "You've only fallen into my trap." Otto's arms began to overwhelm Spidey, lifting him off the ground and pushing him towards the open energy cells. "If I touch that coil, we both fry," Peter said, trying to reason for his life. "Yes," Otto smiled hatefully. "If only I'd taken the time to plan for that. Octoids, detach!" he ordered with gusto. His own arms popped from their sockets and continued to snake around Peter, forcing him closer and closer to a fiery end. As he inched closer to the coils, Peter's arms began to slowly open, trying to let their master free in order to save him. "No, we're in this together," Peter ordered and willed his arms to clamp shut around him once more. "We're gonna beat him, together," Spidey assured his robotic partner. Otto grinned wildly as he watched Peter struggle. "This is why I will always win," he said. "No price is too great for my revenge. You should never have touched my things, Spider-Man," he taunted as Peter's head began to sizzle in proximity to the coil's energy. But as Otto's attention was fixed on Spidey, Norman Osborn leapt from the shadows. He took one hearty swing and clocked Octavius across the jaw, sending the mad scientist to the floor. "Octoids, protect me!" Otto called instinctively, causing his mechanical minions to drop Spidey inches away from his demise. Otto turned to Norman. "I hope you enjoyed having the upper hand, because now I have 4 of them." "Too slow, Otto. You forgot about me," Spidey quipped as one of his arms sliced through one of Doc Ock's. Once he regained the advantage, Spider-Man was sure to not let up. Getting in close, Peter took a swing at Otto himself, pulverizing the megalomaniac. Once Peter's extra limbs had dismantled Otto's, the Doctor was at Spider-Man's mercy. Peter's cold, metal limbs wrapped themselves around Octavius's neck and began squeezing tighter and tighter. "Stop! I can't breathe," Otto choked out. "What a pity," Peter said coldly. "Whoa!" Norman cried out. "Spider-Man, stop! What are you doing?" Osborn's words snapped Peter out of his trance. "Uh-huh," he said, then looked down at Otto sputtering in his grasp and quickly released his arm's deadly grip. "Maybe help me out of these things," Spidey asked Norman. "I think they might be a bad influence." "On it," Norman said. No sooner had Osborn approached, though, that the arms whipped out at him. "Stop!" Spidey ordered. "It's time for us to go our separate ways." Peter looked down at the robotic limbs. "We're not good for each other, but that doesn't mean we're not friends, okay?" he told them. Dutifully, the arms unclenched from around his waist and allowed Spider-Man to detach from them without a fight. While he was freeing himself, however, Octavius's Octoid robots had managed to smuggle their lead out of the lab into the sewers below. Peter, Norman, and Peter's arms dashed after him, but after hours of searching, were unable to locate the troubled Doctor. Serenely, Peter and Osborn stood atop the roof after the ordeal was over. "Go easy on yourself," Norman told Spidey. "Those tunnels were designed for Otto to escape." "That's exactly it," Peter said, disappointed. "In the end, he got me." Norman closed his eyes. "In the height of my madness, I thought the natural state of humanity was to exploit and abuse each other," he said as Peter listened closely. "But it seems if 2 people spend enough time together, the much greater risk is that they will become friends." The silence of the night finally overtook the 2 men as they stared out across the New York skyline. Safe, but for how long? Spider-Man is no stranger to weirdness. His forgotten clone is enough to prove that.